Okay, welcome to the On Your Side podcast. I'm Gary Harper.
And I'm Susan Campbell.
I made a little mistake today, didn't I, Susan?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. So apparently we have some kind of a podcast studio digital calendar that we're supposed to reserve the booth for.
We've had this for 2 years.
And I am just now finding out about this. Why didn't anybody ever tell me about this?
I thought you knew.
No.
I thought you were scheduling them and you were doing it with the calendar.
So I double booked today's guest with another person who booked the booth, and then I couldn't get in here today, but we adjusted the time schedule and we are good to go.
Fortunately, our guest was flexible and you learned a new skill.
Is there anything else that I need to know about when it comes to scheduling these podcasts? Because I feel like an idiot.
You shouldn't feel like an idiot.
And you remember I texted you today when you told me this, and I'm like, oh, he needs to tell everybody. You're like, it's in the planner.
Yeah, you were a little confounded.
I was. Yeah,
but we resolved it.
We did resolve it, and our guest was kind enough to just kind of adjust his schedule. Today's topic, by the way, I guess you can say it's a little dark because we're talking about funerals, cremation, passing.
It's a part of life.
It's a part of life.
So we shouldn't feel like it's hard to talk about. Let's just talk about it.
Let's just talk about it. There's a lot of things people do not know. I mean, have you planned a funeral before, Susan?
I haven't. I've watched my parents help plan their parents' funerals, but I haven't been intimately involved in that.
Yeah, I had to do a quick learn because my two parents passed away 2 years ago within 30 days of each other. So it was a quick learning experience. But
for a lot of people, it's at the height of an emotional time.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, you're trying to deal with the loss of a loved one, and it's difficult. You just want to push through it. So it is difficult. But listen, we're talking to a consumer advocate. His name is Ed Michael Reggie, and you got a website, interesting website, Ed, called Funeralocity, and I think a lot of people should know about this now before they, are in search of what to do when somebody passes. First of all, thank you for being on the On Your Side podcast today. Tell everybody where you're joining us from.
I'm joining you from the Turks and Caicos.
How is it down there, or do I need to ask?
It's in the 70s and beautiful weather today.
Absolutely. Enjoy. And again, thank you for taking time out to be with Susan and I. Tell me about Funeralocity. And for people who don't understand, it's a great resource, a great website, because you took the time to post the cost and the expenses from just about every single funeral home across the nation. Tell us about that and how it works.
That's exactly right. Someone can go to our website and tap in a zip code and get the prices of all the funeral and cremation providers in their area. We did this because 90+% of funeral homes, the 20,000 funeral homes in America, don't put their general price lists online. Right now, the FTC is looking at changing that and requiring it perhaps to be online. But in the meantime, all the prices are there to be compared at funeralocity.com. And we don't think you want the cheapest of everything, but we think price is important to look at before you call the funeral home. Most families, when in the time of need, call that one funeral home they've always used, and they don't look at the prices. And, we live in the age of Amazon, where we price these things, and this is an expensive item. So we advocate, number one, look at the prices, come to Funeralocity, look at that. And we have other tips that we want people to follow to get the most from a funeral.
I know there is such a range and so many different types of services and add-ons, for lack of a better term, that you can add to a funeral and to burial costs. But what is the actual kind of baseline price or the range of prices that consumers could be looking at? Because I think for a lot of people, it is something you don't look at all until you're faced with it in that emotional state and you're going, whoa, sticker shock, holy cow here.
Yeah.
The difference can be tremendous. A direct cremation in Phoenix today, you can find one for $700 or $800 from one funeral provider, or you can find one for $6,000 or $7,000.
And that's the same.
That
That's the
is,
same service.
it's getting your loved one's ashes returned to you in a small container. That's the difference. It's very difficult, honestly, for one funeral home to say we do it 10 times better than the other one. It's a very difficult thing. And the reason for that, of course, is if families are calling the same funeral home every time and the prices aren't online, the temptation is that prices creep up. And some funeral homes are just have creeped their prices up to a very high level. And there's also cremation has become a major thing in America and in Arizona especially. And what has happened is, especially if you want to be buried, a lot of funeral homes have really increased prices to make up for it because they're losing a lot of revenue because many families just get a cremation and actually go to the club or go to a restaurant and celebrate the life of the loved one. Things are moving away from funeral homes. So we have to watch where charges are being made and be very careful about the prices.
Let's go back to the FTC, and I do hope they go through with making this a mandatory situation with posting prices online. But tell me, why don't they do it now? Do they not want their competitor to see how much they're charging?
You mean why don't funeral homes do it?
Yes.
Oh, of course. And honestly, they don't want to get into a competitive pricing thing. And the fact that families typically, in fact, the NFDA, the National Funeral Directors Association, conducts a survey every year. More than 80% of the time, the families just call that one funeral home. So no one has an incentive to create a price war. Everyone's just getting a lot of business without having to talk price so much. And let's always be fair to the funeral industry. Everything's not price. There are other quality aspects that we have to consider as well. The FTC, incidentally, is looking at that, and it's expected that this year they will require all funeral homes to post prices online. But it will then become only the second industry in America required to do that. The first one, 4 or 5 years ago, hospitals. But no one else. Your law firms, accounting firms, none of these people have to post their prices.
Well, and we know with
hotels do voluntarily.
Right, and we know with hospitals that it has been required, but kind of a slow rollout of these things actually getting posted.
Yeah.
We've evaluated this a handful of times with different reports you and I have done.
Right.
So implementing it is one thing, and then actually the follow through on the other end. So consumers do have all of this information is a totally different ballgame.
Yeah.
We can go to your site. We can check out different prices. What are some of the questions that you think consumers should be asking? Because we want to pick up the phone. We want to make a phone call, be a good informed consumer, and find out what we are going to be paying or what would be included. What are the 3 questions or so that you would say, don't skip? Ask every single person you're calling.
Let me say first that the smartest thing to do is to do this ahead of time and not do it, as you said, in a grief-stricken state. To be given financial decisions like that are typically the 5th most expensive item in someone's life is a funeral. Car, college, wedding, house come first. And then comes the thousands of dollars of a funeral. 70% of the time, we do it in the moment of grief. And that's very, very difficult. So doing it ahead of time really helps the family in every way. To the questions to ask, or of course, you need to decide whether you want a cremation or a burial. There are things that we recommend, like don't buy an obituary. Obituaries cost $300 or $400. First of all, very few people read the traditional newspaper anymore. Why are you posting it? And there are free websites, obituary.com, for instance. It's spelled with a Y, not an E. I mean, with an E, not a Y, obituary.com. It's a permanent obituary site where you can post it and not have to pay. There are a lot of opportunities like that. As you may know, you don't have to buy your casket from a funeral home. The FTC says that you can buy them from, yes, Walmart or Costco or online. And by law, a funeral home cannot add anything in handling charges at all for accepting that and then using it in the funeral.
Can I just add that I knew that a lot of people, I'm going to say, did you know that you could buy a casket at Sam's?
I did not.
And I was on their website yesterday looking around, and these caskets, number one, are beautiful, and they are a fraction of the cost that you would pay at the funeral home. And I think that's something that people need to be aware of, but they're not. Is that a huge upcharge at the funeral home for
Of course,
a casket?
Of course it is. It used to be until 1984 that you only paid for the casket and the rest of the funeral was thrown in. It was one price, a casket price. Which casket do you want? And then the FTC said, no, you need to establish a general price list with line items. And so then they broke it all out. But indeed, we're in America. When the loved ones show up at the funeral home to bury mom, they ask, do you want this casket or look at this one? Wouldn't this honor mom more? And we live in America. It's you want fries with that. We're always trying to upsell all the time, and in a grief-stricken state, it's very difficult. But yes, caskets can range in price tremendously.
I could see that happening.
Well, it's hard to say no. This is the last thing you can do to honor your loved one, right?
Don't you want the very best for your mother? Take a look at this $12,000 casket. It's much better. I could see that happening.
1,000%.
Yeah, it's like a car.
It's your last moment to show, in your mind, you can get wrapped up in like, oh my goodness, this is the last thing I can possibly do for this person.
Right. So you want the very best.
So you gotta go. You gotta go for it. I can understand how that emotion plays into it, and how all of a sudden, you go into this saying, I have to stick to a budget, and then all of a sudden the budget is completely blown, and you don't know what happened.
Yeah, it's like, how do we get to this dollar amount?
Yeah.
What the heck? Let's talk a little bit about negotiating, and you brought up a really good point earlier about pre-planning a funeral. Can you negotiate at that time? And also, can you negotiate at the time when there's not a pre-planned funeral that's paid? Can you negotiate in both sides of that? And how do you do that?
Of course you can negotiate. You can't say for sure that they're going to want to negotiate. Some funeral homes are very rigid, but other ones, we have found that when you say, I'm looking at the prices and my family's looking at prices around you, and wow, yours are so much higher. And, is there anything you can do for me? I mean, there's a way to introduce the negotiation. They said, look, let me work. But absolutely, I would always say you should negotiate. Typically with pre-need, the funeral home agrees to freeze its prices that day when you arrange the pre-need, so that if you die 10 years later, those prices are in place and you've already financed it and your family is relieved of the burden of having to pay or even plan for it.
I remember that's what when my grandpa passed away, my grandma decided to just go ahead and plan hers also at the same time. Mm-hmm. And they froze the prices at what it was. She lived for a lot of years beyond that. Mm-hmm. And it was such a burden off of my mom and her brothers. There was no planning. It was all decided.
Yeah.
Everything was all chosen, all done.
Right.
And we got to actually go and honor my grandma and not think about
it makes it
what the cost of this was, or like, where is this money coming from? Is it coming from her estate, or are all the kids chipping in, or what's happening?
Right.
Don't worry about it.
It makes it so much easier. As you know, I lost a loved one recently, and I went to the funeral this past weekend. She had prepaid for her funeral. Everything was, paid up front. It was all done. It made it very easy for the family. But the family got a little bit of a refund back, because it turned out to be just a grave site service. Mm-hmm. That's it. So there was no embalming that needed to be done. There was no wake or any kind of visitation. So, the family didn't take up the room at all. So all this, which was prepaid for, they got money back for things that were not used. So that's something to probably keep in mind if you've prepaid for something, right, Ed?
That's correct. It can be changed, and a refund is due to the family or the estate, depending on how it's phrased.
Right.
If something less happens.
And alternately, you could always upgrade too if you chose that path.
Right.
You know, if you get to a certain place and you're like, oh gosh, we planned this and, you know, we need way more space or time for a wake than we realized.
Yeah.
Because
well, whatever
person became really popular.
Yeah, right.
And we're gonna be here for hours and hours and hours. You know, like
right.
you can always upgrade to then after the planning has already been done.
This is true. Hey Ed, I got a personal question for you. Have you prepaid your funeral? Is that something you've taken care of?
I have not prepaid it. I've planned it, but I have not, and I really should practice what I preach better. But I'm a member of the generation that thinks we're going to live forever, and but
I'm part of that generation. Yes. You know, it is kind of I don't know if I would use I guess I am going to use it. It's kind of morbid in a way, planning your own funeral when you're still, you know, alive and kicking and healthy and stuff. But I mean, it's the best thing to do for your family.
If it's possible, yeah.
If it's possible, absolutely. Hey, tell us more about Funeralocity, where our viewers and our listeners can find you. Anything? Do you have social media, anything like that if they want more information, Ed?
We're on social media as well, but really the place to go is funeralocity.com, where we have all kinds of planning resources and our recommendations for the way to save money and get the best business practices of the best funeral homes. We also have a credentialing process where funeral homes go through a credentialing process with us so that we can award them a status of being credentialed, which it's not just price, it's also quality. So go to the website, and I think you find what you need there.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And I'll just close things out by saying in Arizona, according to Funeralocity, the traditional full-service burial, that includes everything. That's the casket, the wake, the transportation, all that stuff. Here in Arizona, almost $7,700. And for just a direct cremation, which is no bells and whistles, you're cremated and ashes are given back to you, that's almost $1,500. So I think the dollar amount is kind of important to get out there just so people understand the importance of getting things done now rather than, say, later. All right, Ed, Michael, Reggie, thank you so much for being on the On Your Side podcast. Again, a little bit of a dark topic, but certainly something we needed to talk about. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Gosh, it's my pleasure to be with you guys.
The On Your Side podcast is produced by Brad Denny. Our audio engineer and editor is Todd Martin. Segment producer is Colin Stanton. And I'm Gary Harper.
And I'm Susan Campbell. If you have a problem you can't resolve, maybe we can. Send us a message through azfamily.com or our AZ Family mobile app. Look for the On Your Side section and leave us a message. Thanks so much for listening to the On Your Side podcast. And if you like it, leave us a review. We'll see you next week.
On Your Side is on Good Morning Arizona every weekday morning at 6:45 and 7 o'clock. And every weekday evening on Good Evening Arizona at 4 and 5 o'clock. You can also catch it on Arizona's Family News at 9 on 3TV every weeknight.